Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be your Mistress of Ceremonies for today. I'm a creative producer, Park Ji-sun of Seoul Street Arts Festival 2024. The SSAF is held every year in Seoul in the early weeks of October across many different areas in Seoul. We were originally planning to have the festival again this year towards the end of September and the early part of October across Ujiro and Jongno, but unfortunately because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to cancel the festival. Many street arts festivals, not just in Seoul, but across different markets and different genres have all been canceled, and this has brought about big changes in the entire street arts festival ecosystem. This SSAF will allow us to have a discussion with street artists and programmers who are all facing this global challenge together. And for that, we have established this 2020 Forum on Change and the Exit for Street Art Festivals. We'll be first hearing from Lee Lan-hee of the Korea Street Arts Association, Yoon Jong-yeon, Artistic Director of SSAF, Pierre Dupeau, Artistic Director of Chalon de la Rue, and Maggie Clark, Director of Extract. We have experts from home and abroad who will be engaging in discussions with us today. We'll also be inviting many programmers and young artists from various different walks of life to engage in our panel discussion. This SSAF forum will be held today and tomorrow across 2 days. We might not be able to find a clear answer, but hopefully we can discuss the changes and the ways out for street arts festivals, both at home and abroad. Because of COVID-19, we've often been hearing the word contactless or untapped here in Korea. This SSAF 2020 forum is also held in a virtual or contactless manner. We have received pre-registrations. There are about 50 members of the audience who have joining us online. Will you please wave your hands for us? Yes, it is great to see you. Thank you very much for being with us. I think we have some audience members in Korea, in Seoul, nationwide across Korea. Thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you will stay with us until the end of the forum. With that, we would like to begin the SSAF 2020 forum in earnest. The first part of this forum will be held under the theme of current status of street arts festivals at home and abroad. Through this session, we'll be able to understand more about the current status of street arts festivals, not just in Korea, but across the world. For that, we'd like to first hear from Lee Lan-hee.
Yes, good afternoon. I am Lee from Korea Street Arts Association. Amid current COVID-19, a lot of street art festivals have been modified in the shape of hosting. Usually May and September and October is most popular months for street art. And pandemic started in March in Korea, and it subdued in June and July, and in August it deteriorated again. So social distancing level 2 was put into action. So many of the street art festival were concentrated in May, and many of them have been canceled. And when the situation worsened in August, a lot of festivals scheduled for autumn and fall, although they made a lot of preparations, but they could not but cancel those festivals. In fact, up until 2019, Korean street arts festivals were on the path of expansion. There were new festivals created, and existing festivals enlarged their street art related programs. So street arts or outdoor arts were very conducive to integration of community and art offering to the citizens. So it permeated to our everyday lives. But once 2020 came along with pandemic, street arts were isolated from the public art, and many of the professionals in this industry were suffering. Fall festivals, they were looking for different ways to hold the festivals, like social distancing and virtual and small and distributed festivals. So they made different attempts. And with pandemic, they revisited the value of street arts and festivals. So amid this background, we had held three different online sessions in early April when Corona was its highest. We wanted to check each other if they're okay, if everyone is okay. And in second general session, in everyday lives that were changed by pandemic, how street arts are meeting spectators in a realistic format. So we pondered upon that question. And the third online forum was held in July when coronavirus was on temporary hiatus. So Seoul Fringe Festival and Sihung Festival and other Gyeongchun Railroad festivals that were scheduled in the second half of this year were discussed. We talked about the limitation of outdoor festivals, and we talked about the possibility that we can consider. And Mr. Sung-young Lee, Marine Boy, who is quite popular, talked about survival of creators and communication with the spectators and audience, and what kind of changes that need to be brought about on those topics. So he shared his talk on these topics. Through these three rounds of online conferences, we understood what kind of damage street art related industries suffered, and we also wake up to the fact that we need to come up with standard contract for street art realm. So we're in the process of coming up with a standard contract, and we're going to hold a contract writing or agreement writing workshop with the stakeholders in the industry. In the changing situation, many autumn festivals were held in a distributed way and on a mixture of online and offline, physical and virtual. So they wanted to change the format of hosting the festivals, and a lot of questions were raised in the course of those thoughts. Nonetheless, art festival and street arts, should they continue? So all the fundamental question was, should it continue or can it continue? And in what kind of format or shapes can we aspire to? So more practical strategy was the topic of different set of questions. And why did we come to this reality? And we also recognize a more fundamental question of should street art festival or street art continue in this reality. So we can categorize festivals into ones that were canceled and ones that were reshaped. So many of the canceled festivals wanted to go for social distancing, viewership, and stronger preventive measures. Some of them had strong control over the viewers and spectators, and they also utilized online platform at the same time. They changed a mode of hosting. Many of the festivals that were canceled after the cancellation, citizens and creators might have felt quite a loss. So after the cancellation, there were some shows videotaped and aired to the audience. So it was filmed without audience, physical audience, but sometimes those shows were aired or archived. So they still try to partially introduce different programs after the cancellation of the festival. So let's go through these festivals one by one. Now, Ansan Street Arts Festival was scheduled for from 1st to 3rd of May 2020, and the festival was cancelled. In this case, in June, although belatedly, some of the Korean shows were live streamed without any in situ audience. So there was no physical audience at all or members of the audience at all. It was filmed and it was shown on the online platform. And likewise, Suwon Theater Festival is usually take place, something that usually takes place in May, and it was cancelled, and they went for two different alternatives. One is a sponsorship program, so citizens were asked to donate so that the contents for the next year's festival can be fortified and further created. And another venue they took was, I think it's still underway. So the title of Suwon Theater Festival was Party in the Woods, and they slightly tweaked the title to Overland Party in the Woods. So some of the Korean programs or shows were performed indoors, not outdoors as scheduled, without audience. It was aired, and they also conducted some interviews with the actors and actresses, and they released these shows one by one online. So some of the follow-up measures taken by these festivals were coming up with were rather than coming up with the alternative mode of hosting in order to console the sentiment of the creators and the citizens after the show is canceled, they took a different venues, they took different paths. And I think Pohang Street Art Festival went through different discussions. This was scheduled in May, and they postponed it to August because of the pandemic, and they earned some time, and during the time they thought about how to go about hosting the festival. But again, in August, the situation deteriorated, so they ultimately had to cancel the festival. But in the process, they made different programs, and I believe they are holding these programs that they have prepared. So one is Street Art Academy, so it's educational or training program for the artists from the local region. And the second one is education program targeted at the citizens. So when the past way of doing things were made unavailable, they wanted to go for a new way of connecting with local artists and local citizens. So they created programs that focused on connection with local artists and citizens. And Gwacheon Festival was slated to be held in late September, but it was also ultimately canceled. So Goyang Lake Festival and Seoul Street Art Festival were all scheduled to take place in late September and early October. All of these were canceled, so they were quite severely hit by deterioration or second wave of corona in Korea. So Gwacheon Festival, they were preparing virtual special programs. And these programs were individually can be viewed by spectators in some part. And some of the programs were like tutorials or videos that were disclosed online. So viewers can download the kit and experience the show at home. And there was also a program where the artist will draw or come up with a drawing or when they come across a spectator on the street. So it was small scale. So there were small programs that were taking place. And they also collected shows in one series called Unfinished Story, Gwacheon Festival. So let me now turn to the festivals that were not canceled. So they strengthened preventive measures, and the viewership was encouraged to enforce social distancing. And first one was Gwangmyeong Family Festival. And second one was Gyeongchun Railroad Forest Trail Festival that is done by Noan District. So Gwangmyeong Festival, Family Festival, took place right before level 2 social distancing was put in place. And Noan District's Gyeongchun Railway Festival was something that was held on a weekly basis during weekends. So they had more stronger preventive measures in place, and it finished last week. And Gwangju Street Art Festival started last week, and they're scheduled to end this week. And they allowed spectators with stronger social distancing, and they also conducted more sanitary measures. So they stayed with the old way of conducting the festival. And with Seoul Fringe Festival, in fact, the situation was quite bad. It was mid-August. So in order to overcome the limitation of the existing method, they added new platform of online, and on and offline were done at the same time. It's not just unilateral airing of shows online. They created online space where the virtual characters can go through different streets and shows. So it's gamified platform, and this was distributed to the spectators, and the spectators can enjoy from home. So it's quite limited and small scale, but they introduced Metabus methodology here, so it was quite an experimental attempt. So gamified world, Metabus, many are very accustomed to this kind of world. So we can also think about what kind of usefulness a festival can offer to the citizens who are used to this Metabus and gamified world. I think the following speakers can dwell on those topics further. Next one is a circus cabaret and Goblin's Market, and they expanded the space. And with circus cabaret, the concept they introduced was drive-in circus. So spectators stayed in their cars and watched the show. And Chuncheon Mime Festival in May was cancelled, but in the long duration, in different programs, in different periods, for different programs were offered, and it was titled Chuncheon Mime 100 Scene. So it continued until late October, and social role of festivals were also something they thought about. And today's world of pandemic was also depicted in many of the pieces that were in view. So very briefly, I will visit 3 different cases of Europe. So these are the strong houses of street arts. So they are very famous festivals, so many of you will know these festivals. And the situation is not too different from what we are experiencing in Korea. In June, July, and August, there are 3 different festivals in France. Viva Cité in Sotril, and Shalom de la Rue, and Olang Street Festival. As far as I know, Sotobe, Oria, so all 3 were cancelled with their original schedule, but Orial and Viva Cité, after the cancellation, they haven't done anything new after the cancellation was decided on. They do have street art production houses in the local cities, so they focused on creative activities after the festival was cancelled, instead of holding separate festivals or events. But with Shalom Dance La Rue, In order to continue with the connection with the spectators and audience, they started a new program with the title of Rendezvous d'Automne. So every month on a regular basis until November, I think they're planned and held different shows and programs. And I think more details will be covered by artistic director of Shalong Danslal Ru, who will be presenting. So many thoughts were given, of course, by these festival organizers. So regarding the way of putting a show, street arts, the specific deliverables or outcomes did not come through. But we can find some differences with the British example. The first one is Greenwich Docklands International Festival. They usually take place in June. It was postponed once to September, and they indeed held the festival in September.
On the 28th of August, 2020, Greenwich and Docklands International Festival became the first major festival in the country to welcome audiences back after lockdown. After 5 long months of isolation, the festival set out to celebrate togetherness. Artists worked together with participants to create events which were often delivered directly on people's doorsteps.
You can't be doing it far away from the community and call it community spirit. It has to be in the community so that the community can embrace it and take ownership.
Then they can see the work come together outside and really get a sense of belonging and community and being engaged in something bigger than just one person.
This was a festival created.
Yes, in fact, in the UK after lockdown, this was the first public street art or outdoor art festival. So I played the clip for a brief moment so that you can experience the feel of it. Next one is Stockton Riverside Festival and Freedom Festival. All of these also encompass online programs and participatory programs. So to a certain extent, the festival was digitized. And in the first half of this year, Brighton Festival also embraced that online method. So online platform was actively utilized, and the access online platform offers, the interest it can create, can be quite appealing to the creators. Or maybe online platform was chosen to fulfill the mission of these festivals, which is to make art offering available to the citizens. So because of the time constraints, I will not play the video. Excuse me. So in Spain, Street Art Festival, the prime example is Fira Targa, which is marketplace like festival. Many of the street art festival creators come together, they network with each other and introduce their program, and they engage in active exchange. So it's more like a professional program. Let's play the video a little bit. So this year, it was moved to online. So the video that you are seeing on screen is something that details how the professional, the creators who took part in the program felt about the new form of exchanges. So they talked about connections that were made virtually, how they're different from the connections or the networking that was done in the physical world.
¿Qué queremos? Pues nos gustaría estar aquí.
Un espai idíl·lic, envoltat d'una naturalesa idíl·lica.
I like the way that you move your hips. I like the cool way.
Hola, Tarra. Acabo de sortir del CAP per fer-me una PCR i això és el que tenim aquest any, aquests moments, que segurament no se'ns oblidaran, però que vaja, que és el que toca i la sort que tenim és que ens podem connectar via les plataformes digitals i seguir amb aquesta proximitat i treballant per les arts de carrer perquè, doncs això, l'espai públic torni a ser nostre.
영상을 보시면 이제 아시겠지만 계속 이 영상
As you can tell from the video, so creators and artists, they look at different performances
열리게 될 장소와 연결
and they also draw a link between the performance and the location the performance took place. So they establish the linkage. So the final scene is quite impressive. So this empty plaza is when one is sitting down and they hear the clapping, the audience cheer in their imagination, so they can recall the memory, a distant memory of performing in front of the audience. So when I look back on the year 2020, these questions remain with me. So there are so many different questions, and we need to do some research and have a conversation and try and make different experimental attempts. And I hope we will be able to meet everyone in the better street art festival in the coming year.
Thank you very much. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen that there were many changes brought to the situation here in Korea, as well as in different street art scenes in Europe. She has left us with many questions, and I do hope that both today and tomorrow, throughout the course of the forum, we can have discussions to explore some answers to those questions. So thus far, we have been able to see an overview of the current situation of the Korean street art scene. So now we would like to learn a little bit more about the different attempts and explorations made by a Seoul Street Arts Festival. We'd like to hear from Artistic Director of SSAF, Yoon Jong-yeon, for his presentation. Hello, it is a pleasure to meet you. I'm Yoon Jong-yeon. I'm the Artistic Director of Seoul Street Arts Festival. Today, I would like to tell you a little bit about the accomplishments that we've made on a Seoul Street Arts Festival that are still incomplete. I would like to tell you about the process leading up to the preparation and what happened with SSAF post-COVID. I would like to go a little bit further than that and tell you a little bit about the dilemmas that we had around the square and the center and about the different developments that we've made exploring these different concerns. SSAF allows for different genres to be brought together. So there are many different artists who participate in SSAF. In the festival, we think about how art intervention should be made in the public sphere, and we also want to engage in solidarity with artists to try to bring about some new change, a change of pace in the urban lifestyle. Unfortunately, this SSAF 2020, which is celebrating its 18th birthday, has come to a standstill because of COVID-19. We also wanted to protect the community, and we also did not want to sacrifice ourselves. We had to cancel the SSAF. But we also know that COVID-19 has brought about so many changes to our society, and we wanted to bring an artistic perspective to that. And because many of the artistic organizations and artists have worked so hard to prepare for SSAF, it was very unfortunate that we had to cancel the festival. However, we are engaging in archiving efforts to try to listen to the stories of the creators and to try to record the different processes that took into place in leading up to the preparation of the SSAF. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about the preparatory work involved in SSAF leading up to the situation of COVID-19. SSAF 2020, our theme was unfamiliar and everyday life. We also wanted to think about what would be safe for our audience members, but we also wanted to make it a little bit unfamiliar because that ties in with the fact that we feel that we are living in a city that has been made unfamiliar because of COVID-19, and we wanted to look at that kind of society through the Street Arts Festival. We also wanted to provide for the safety and efficiency, so we've expanded the timeline and schedule of SSAF from September to October, and we've also allowed for a decentralized staging of the events. So instead of just focusing on the center, we also tried to look at the peripheral areas. So instead of just focusing on the Seoul center, we looked at Jongno, Eujiro, and all the way to Seonyu-do Park. We've tried to expand the scope of the festival. Thirdly, because we are living in a pandemic era, we have experienced many different challenges, and because of certain physical constraints like social distancing, we've wanted to incorporate that as artistic experiments. We also came up with a new program called Very Close Distance. We also issued a competition. It was very urgent and last minute, but because we thought that this was very timely and relevant, and because street arts is so resilient, we thought that although this was a very last-minute competition, we were able to bring in a lot of submissions from artistic organizations that were not originally dedicated solely to the street art space, but they were very dedicated to this new program, Very Close Distance. And I think a lot of the submissions were very interesting and very in-depth as well. We also wanted to engage the artists and the artistic community in a continued relationship. Because it's very hard for us to physically see each other and interact with each other, we wanted to come up with many innovative, different ways to continue our interactions and relationships with one another. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the details later on in my presentation. In the process, we had to think newly about the use of the space, Seoul Square, which is the principal stage of SSAFs. So let me briefly touch upon Seoul Square and the surrounding areas. Seoul Square had for a long time been the principal stage for the street art scene. However, recently, from my viewpoint, I think that there were many voices of individuals, specifically many different protests, very extreme protests, and people who are willing to compromise. And those voices are meeting with the street art scene here. So we felt that it is meaningless for us to use this space for street arts going forward. So instead of just focusing on Seoul Square, we thought that maybe we should branch out to surrounding areas because we know that decentralization is the ongoing theme for street arts now. So we thought instead of just focusing on the center space, we should look at these surrounding areas. Because of COVID-19, we were forced to stop our lives and our routines and try to take out what's unnecessary, and that is what we've decided to put in. In this empty space that was originally Seoul Square, we came up with a program called 84 Hours, and in Cheonggye Square, we came up with a program for the unheard song. Going back to 84 Hours, this is about the struggles of the artist who is living in a time that is just isolated from reality. And in fact, the artist was made to reside in the space for literally 84 hours. So it was a programmed event. And like the unheard song in Cheonggye Square, there's this artist over there that you can see is isolated in that space. But if you want to listen to the musician's performance, you have to go online to listen to it, even if he's just very close by. Because we wanted to allow for safe viewing and a safe enjoyment of SSAF, 을지로, 대림, and 종로, 창신동. Some of these areas became the stage for SSAF, and 영산도, 산유도, and 물레도 were some of the new areas as well. This allowed us to think again about site specificity and stage. This also allowed for more vibrant research as well. For Changshindong, the coal mining areas that were used in the Japanese colonial times are still there. A lot of the old heritage sites are still there. So we've incorporated those elements as well. And in Jongno, in Sajikdong, the Campbell, former missionary, Campbell used to live, and his old residence is still there. So we also came up with a street arts program on the theme of family. Hello, My Home was staged here. 을지로, 대림 commercial area, 진안 underground commercial area, and the 을지로 streets were also widely purposed for street arts. 선유도, 용산, 물레도, we also came up with very site-specific programs. These different spaces all have their own characteristics, and the impression that we had of an unfamiliar city were incorporated into the unseen movement. Kim Boram, Kim Jae-dong, Kim Yoo-jin, Im Se-byul all participated. These are dancers who participated in this to try to record through their physical movements the inspiration that they got from the space, and we recorded this in audiovisual format. Next, I'd like to talk about international exchange in a virtual era. We cannot physically meet with other people, specifically overseas partners, and we don't have any international exchange with them, but we still want to exchange our ideas and experiment our different artistic practices, which is why we plan these different international exchange programs in a virtual online format. Willie Donor Company, based in Australia, came up with a dance 노래방 or dance karaoke program where Korean and Austrian participants, despite not being able to be physically together, they could engage with one another. We had these studio spaces. Secondly is Jordi and Eva, Spanish artists, where they worked together with Korean street artists in Mulledong on a program called We Are Afraid. Now, Korean creators in Mulledong did a space research. Jordi and Eva met with them online to work together on the production. The actual performance, it was conducted in Spain, and the images were projected on the walls in Mulledong. Lastly is an example of Arupunkta, which is a French troupe. They came up with a program called What Would Happen If Nothing Happens. They sat in the steps of Yongsan, which is where they listened to the voice of this actress, of this actor looking out across Marseille, which is a very similar view from what they were able to see from the steps of Yongsan. We come up with many of these alternatives to a festival, but there is also Kangjiuk's Universe, MB, Cruise, Madang, other interesting new approaches were made. These different street arts programs. The art festival was canceled, and because it was canceled, we decided to turn to archiving and to other alternative means, such as this forum, to try to tell many people about the plans and the activities that we are prepared for. However, as the SAF, Seoul Street Arts Festival, it's now time for us to look forward. We are facing a new challenge. I think we have to continue to see more growth. The street arts ecosystem is being really challenged. We have to expose the different emotions that have been oppressed thus far and try to recover the different networks and relationships that have been cut between us. And also, there were some issues that we have not really been able to see, but that we have not been able to grapple with, which are environmental issues. These environmental issues and the issues of our most vulnerable communities are something that we have to come to grips with now. And I think those are very important challenges. Jordi and Eva's festival was canceled again. So with that, I would like to leave you with a short video clip of their performance clip.
3 episodes and a prologue. In every episode, we embodied one of our fears, and by embodying fears, we transcended them, walked them through, made them visible.
Episode 4 and Seoul Street Arts Festival ended up not being, but they both happened. Episode 4 existed. Our fears were put into words, sounds, images, and movements throughout all the summer, through emails, online, long connections, WhatsApp messages, calls, meetings. Teams in Catalonia and in Korea became one. We became a family. This time the metaphor took us to put questions on our disappearance, our death, the end of humanhood, and the traces of all our existences and memories. And then, suddenly, just when we were arriving to the shore of the island, the pandemic cancelled our attempt to get there.
Now we look back, and we can't see neither the island
I think there is
nor
still
episode
more
4
left remaining on the video.
or the festival edition. But it happened. Although it is not on a map, our ship meant a successful trip to a ghost production.
So I almost forgot the most important point. Jordi and Eva in their last video just said that the Seoul Street Arts Festival 2020 may not be left on the map, but in 2021 we can say that the 2020 festival did in fact exist. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. As you mentioned, in 2020, the festival was cancelled and couldn't take place. But as I hear the presentation, we could understand that there were many different attempts made and many endeavors or efforts were made. The festival was non-existent in 2020, but it was still existent at the same time. So next presentation is from the presenters from France and the UK. And we're going to hear talks about counterplans of Overseas Street Arts Festival 2020 and 2021. They're not physically here, but they're going to present to us over a virtual platform. First presentation will be given by Artistic Director of Chalon dans la Rue, Pierre Dufault.
Ah oui. Eh ben, Bonjour, je suis très heureux d'être
Good afternoon, ladies and
connecté avec
gentlemen. I'm
vous
very pleased
aujourd'hui.
to give you this talk
Donc
over
voilà,
online
effectivement,
platform.
comme il a été décrit
I'm
par les présentateurs
meeting all of
précédents,
you
par les
through this online
programmateurs, par
platform.
Annie,
And as
le
you
Festival de Chalon dans la rue a
heard,
donc
my
dû
Shalom
être annulé.
Dans la rue examples were cited
Nous
in the
avons
previous
donc
presentation. I will
fait le
provide you with more
choix
details. The
de
festival had to be
présenter un
cancelled,
autre
and
projet
we
qui
made
a
the
été
following
écrit au
choices.
printemps. Cet
So
autre
we
projet s'appelle le
intended
Rendez-vous
to
d'automne.
offer an
On peut
alternative
passer à
festival
next
or
slide,
events
please.
to the audience. So it was titled Promise for the Autumn instead of Spring. So can you go to the next slide, please?
Voilà. Pardon.
Yes, excuse me one moment, please.
Volonté de next slide. It's good.
Can you go to the next slide, please?
Next. Donc, en quelques mots, l'envie en fait
Yes, I can give
présenter
you
ces rendez-vous
a
d'automne
summary of
était de conserver un lien
the events that we
entre
have
les équipes
gone through.
artistiques
So the
et
objective
le
of
public,
the rendezvous, the
et se dire
autumn,
qu'il y
was
avait une
to
nécessité
maintain
à cet
a
endroit,
connection between artists and the audience.
une nécessité pour les équipes artistiques aussi, donc avec
So to
un travail
artists,
sur la production.
general public and the
Donc
audience
on
is
a
someone they have to
continué
meet,
à
and the
ouvrir
artists
notre
had
lieu de
to
résidence.
continue with their creative works.
On a aussi
So we had a
renforcé les
residence
moyens
program,
financiers
and many of the
pour
residencies
la
were open to
production
the
et la
artists
création,
for them to
pour
use.
permettre aux équipes
And we also
de
secured some financial
reprendre
aids
ce
and
travail de
assistance
création
so that the artists can
volonté.
continue to engage in creative works.
Et
And that's what happened
l'idée
during the
était
summer.
aussi de transférer, de reporter
And
un maximum de projets du festival
as much as possible, instead of giving up on different projects, we wanted to postpone to fall season as much as possible. So next slide, please.
Donc on a créé ça.
So this is what we have come up with. Can you see?
Donc l'envie a été de non pas refaire un festival.
So what we aspired to was not holding the festival as is. We wanted to create a new story.
Comme je disais, on l'a écrite au printemps.
The story here
On a imaginé que la pandémie
is because of the pandemic in spring was something that we thought of as pandemic persisted and aggravated.
Une histoire d'une ville endormie.
Nonetheless, we couldn't give up, and we wanted to capture some hope in this program. So we wanted to give city that was dormant because of the pandemic piercing light of hope.
Donc cette histoire en 3 temps, je l'ai appelée le lever.
So the story narrative was comprised of 3 acts. The first one was the dawn, and the first act was titled The Dawn.
Le deuxième, c'est le lever.
So it was right before the sun comes up. And the second act was titled Rise. So after the sunrise. And the third one was titled Horizon. So we created the program chronologically. So the dawn was in late August, and Rise was at the end of September, and Horizon was at the end of October. So in the beginning, the scale was smaller, but as we proceed to the third act, our plan was to enlarge the scale of the event and maybe welcome a physical audience. Now, before these 3 acts were put on the show, we also created something we called a Preamble. So the Preamble started on the 22nd of July. So what we did during this Preamble period was quite interesting. So the 22nd of July was an official starting date of Shalom dans la rue. So during the preamble, we wanted to send out the message that the festival will still be there. So to artists and to stakeholders in the industry, we invited them to take part in programming these events. And I prepared a video, so if you please can go to the next slide, so we can play the video.
Ok. Donc juste un petit extrait, donc une intervention
Yes,
de
that
cirque
was
rouage,
only
qui a
part of the
lieu
video
à
I
7 heures
played
du
here.
matin, au lever du
So
jour,
as you can see from here,
qui
you
traverse
can see
la
someone
rivière
walking on the
Seoul,
tightrope as soon as
avec une mise en son, quelque chose qui
dawn
était
hits.
non
The
programmé,
creators
enfin
arrive at
non
the city and
communiqué,
showcase these
car on n'avait
performances.
pas
And
l'autorisation
in fact, these were
d'un
not
grand rassemblement,
promoted and widely known
mais
to the general
l'envie de
public or
poser une image
the residents.
dans la ville, une
And
image
we
un
were
peu
not
symbolique.
welcoming spectators. It was
Je
not
vais
an
vous
event,
décrire
so
un
we
peu
didn't
les trois, enfin
notify
on va
this
passer
or
les
register
trois
this
temps
to
en
the
revue.
authorities.
Donc
So that was
l'aube
more
qui a eu lieu
significant to a certain
fin
extent.
août.
So let's, if I may go back to the three acts. So the first act was for late August.
Donc là, simplement le principe de travail de ce
So the
rendez-vous,
principle was quite simple.
ce sont des parcours.
In
Donc on
Act
propose
1,
trois spectacles de courte durée, environ 15 minutes.
Three
Qui se
different
déroulent dans des
15-minute
lieux,
long performances were
fermés dans la ville
showcased.
pour les raisons sanitaires. Et
And
le public
the location
choisit un
of these
parcours,
performances
mais en fait
was
ne
not
connaît
an
pas les
open
artistes
air
qu'il va
environment
rencontrer.
because
Et,
of the risk of
passe
infection.
d'une voie à
It
l'autre
was
comme
done
ça,
in a
et les
closed
publics se
space.
croisent. C'est une
It
manière
was
de
not done in a
sillonner
single place.
la ville,
The
et de
performances
découvrir des
moved
lieux, et
around
surtout aussi de se laisser surprendre
and they were put on
par
view.
les propositions
So from
artistiques.
a
Next slide.
spectator's point of view, it was quite a surprise
deuxième
because they didn't know
temps, qui a eu lieu
had
fin
any prior
septembre,
information about the
on est dans un
performances.
rapport de
Act
spectacle
2 was titled The Rise,
plus
and it took
traditionnel,
place
avec
on the
une
25th and
programmation,
26th and 27th of September.
des spectacles qui sont identifiés pour le public,
So originally,
différents
just
lieux,
like the
une plage publique
performances of the
importante.
past,
Je
when
tiens à
people
signaler
go
que tous
to
ces
this
rendez-vous
theater,
ont
they
été
can
faits
see the
aussi
performances. So these informational programs were already disseminated to people, so they could get the information, and they also had a ticket box, so they could get the information about the performances that would be held. And as you can see, artists were performing and they were having a discussion. And next slide. And finally, we reached Act 3, which took place just a few days ago, last weekend of October. In the beginning, when we programmed and planned this events in spring, we wanted to hold this in late October, and unfortunately, this Act 3 didn't materialize because recently the second lockdown was put into place starting from last Friday. So unfortunately, Act 3 could not be showcased. So we already did the rehearsal on the Thursday, which was right before the second lockdown. So sadly, we could not go through Act 3.
And next.
Next slide, please.
Ok. Donc, je parlais un peu aussi de comment on a accompagné
So,
en fait
what
ce
I'm going to
projet
talk about here
des
is that
rendez-vous d'automne avec un travail autour
the
de la
Rendezvous
correspondance.
of the Autumn
C'est-à-dire
is the
comment,
project that we
pareil, pendant le
planned,
confinement,
and we also had different
comment on
programs
échange, comment
as well,
on est en
parallel,
conversation.
and I'm going to explain
Et
a little bit
on
about
a
them.
souhaité, en fait,
We had a
paradoxalement,
program called
prendre un peu
Correspondence.
le contre-pied
During the time, a lot of
des
people were staying indoors,
communications numériques,
and ironically,
des
we wanted
forums
to
sur
strengthen
et
and
on a
fortify
remis en
linkage
route
or
un système
connection
de
between different
correspondance
people. So
traditionnel avec des cartes
they
postales.
were connecting with each
Ces
other
cartes
with
postales, elles ont
letter
été
writing.
mises
So in
à
August, just as
disposition
we
dans différents
corresponded with
villes.
each other in writing,
On a
we
organisé
used postcards as a
des
medium.
ateliers d'écriture
So
avec des enfants,
across the
avec
city,
des personnes âgées dans
we
différents quartiers. Ces cartes
created
postales
these
ont été aussi
mailboxes with
envoyées
different
dans
postcards,
des
and a lot of residents
et
and citizens
on
were
a
invited to take
procédé
part.
à des collectes
So we had an event where
et à
people can
des
share their
prix
news
dans l'espace
with
public.
postcards.
C'est-à-dire que
So we
régulièrement,
collected
dans
these
Paris,
postcards
on avait
in
un
public
nombre de
spaces, and
comédiens
we
qui
displayed this
arpentaient
in public.
les
And
le
actors and
centre-ville
actresses came
pour
together.
donner à voir et
They
donner
got
à
together in the
entendre
city
surtout
center,
ces cartes postales. Next slide, please.
and
Et
they
pour
read
le
out the
dernier
messages
week-end de
from the
l'horizon,
postcards.
on a organisé donc
And
une
last week,
restitution de quelques
which was
photos sur
original
l'écran,
schedule for the Act
une
3,
restitution de ces cartes
nonetheless, what we
postales. En
did
fait,
was
les milliers de cartes
we
postales
wanted to
que nous
create
avons
this
récoltées
performance.
ont
Thousands
été
of
mises en
postcards were
scène dans
collected
un
together,
espace qui était
and
censé être
we
ouvert au
turned
public
them
ce
into
week-end,
this installation art
avec
piece.
aussi
So this was originally what we
l'objectif
intended
de donner
to showcase
lecture
to
en
spectators
direct
just
au
last
de ces écrits.
weekend.
Next
And the
slide,
center
please.
of all these,
Je vais
the
maintenant
actor would
juste
stand
prendre
and
5
read from
minutes
these postcards.
pour
So
faire un
I
peu le
would
bilan
finish in
de ce
5
projet.
minutes.
Je
For
crois
the
que
remaining
les
5
points
minutes, I'm going to
positifs
talk
sont
about
que
the
on
achievements
a
that we
eu
have made. Of course, there
la
were a lot of
sensation d'avoir
positives
une grande qualité
because
avec ces petits formats de la relation
we were
entre les
convinced
artistes
that
et
we
les
put on a
spectateurs.
very high
Une
quality
grande proximité
festival.
et
In reality, the scale was
quelque chose
small,
de
but
précieux
still,
qui
we were
se
still
déroule
connecting with spectators,
loin
and it was
de
very valuable
l'accumulation
experience.
d'une multitude de spectacles. Dans les points
And
positifs, on peut
it was not a lot of
on peut voir aussi
performances were put on show at the same time, but still, many
on va
of
dire
the
une
highest
valorisation
quality
du travail dans la
performances and
ville
pieces
et
were
du travail sur les
shown
espaces de
in
la ville.
view.
Là,
And with this
je
rendezvous
rebondis
d'automn,
un peu sur
we revisited
l'expérience
the
de
question
Seoul
of
Street Art
urban
Festival
spaces.
où
And
plutôt que de faire
Seoul
sur
street art
Seoul
festivals
Plaza
examples
exclusivement, il y
were
a eu
showcased in the previous presentation,
projets
and you also talked about
qui
Seoul
ont
Plaza,
été
Seoul Square.
produits autour
And through these art
Seoul Plaza
festivals
et
and
de
art
projets dans
projects,
d'autres quartiers.
we can think
C'est ce
about
que
the
nous
space within the
avons
city,
vécu.
Seoul Square and other spaces.
L'autre avantage aussi,
And I
c'est
think
que
that
la
was a
proposition
topic
artistique
we
s'inscrit un petit peu plus
touched
dans le
upon
temps. Au
from
lieu
the
de
Rendezvous
travailler sur
d'Autumn
3
program.
jours, on a 3 week-ends qui déroulent sur 3 mois.
And we
Quelque
could
chose qui
approach
est
this
une
program
proposition, une
within
offre
in
un
a
peu plus
longer perspective. Usually the
pérenne.
festival are taking place in short
Mais
space of time,
il
like
faut
3-4
pas
days.
se cacher
But
quand même
this events were elongated
se
into
voiler
3-4
la
months,
face.
so we could have long-term views and we
On a
could
complètement
prepare for a
perdu
longer term. Of course, there were some
le
challenges
caractère événementiel
because,
et
for
rassembleur
example,
du festival de Chalon dans la rue.
the
On n'a pas eu la chance
attribute of
d'avoir
festivity
la
was
visite
lost to a certain
de
extent.
personnes qui viennent du monde entier, et en
Because
particulier
when
de
the
tous nos
festival
collaborateurs et amis coréens.
is held, people around the world flock together. Artists, creators, and programmers are drawn to the city altogether, but that didn't happen. And one of the questions that I was asked a lot was,
en règles sanitaires, jusqu'où le projet artistique,
complying with preventive measures, how strict should we
pertinente et encore viable,
be, and to what extent can we put on show our performances? So where is the middle ground? And how should we manage the connection or the relationship with the mass, with the general public, wearing face masks or not using some spaces or locations? So under the circumstances, the power of street art, the power of outdoor art can be lost to some degree. Of course, we can try hybrid format, the mixture of on and offline, physical and virtual. But when that happens, what is the prospect of art? Of course, we can try out different things and different approaches, but the festivity, the nature of festivity from events can be diluted. The sense of festival gets to its highest when a lot of people gather, right? So the ambience of festival, or the spirit of festivity is lost to a certain extent. I think there was a sculpture, statue around Seoul Square, and that sculpture has a big head, massive head, and it stands firmly on the ground.
Investir la ville pendant un temps éphémère
Just
et la transformer.
By looking at that, we can realize and implement the art inside the urban space. And as far as I remember, it was Sejong Road, and the cars were blocked out of the space, and it was almost like fantastic, mystical ambience. So that kind of festival spirit, festivity, is lost when physical festival is not being held. So I think I'm nearing the end of my presentation, and I thank you indeed for this opportunity. And I was delighted to give you a talk on the French example. I don't know if we're going to meet in the near future. So I look forward to seeing you again, and we will again be able to discuss our examples, and we will be able to think more about what achievements made by SSAF. And SSAF has a lot of significance to us as well. And in closing, I wish I could go back to Seoul and meet you in person and walk with you on the streets of Seoul and see you again. Of course, we can meet online, but it doesn't suffice. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. 2020, I believe, has been for every artist and all street artists, not just in Korea, but around the world, a year of the same common challenges. We've just heard about the French case. I'd like to once again thank Pierre Dufault, and he has left us with many different questions, and I do hope that we can go into more depth in the discussion session. Next, we'd like to hear from Maggie Clark, who is the Director of Extracts in the UK.
Hello, my name is Maggie Clark. I'm the Director of Extracts based in the UK. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this interesting panel discussion today. It's so lovely to connect with friends from around the world and my friends and colleagues from South Korea. I've been asked, and I'm delighted to share some information with you about what's happening in the UK outdoor arts sector in this really unusual year of 2020. I'm going to say when I'm ready to change the slides. So next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know Extracts, we are a development agency for outdoor arts. We're based in the UK and we've been going for nearly 20 years. In fact, it will be our 20th birthday next year. Our main projects are managing the Without Walls Consortium, which is a network of 35 festivals and organisations, all of whom present outdoor festivals across the whole of England. We're also involved in supporting artists to produce and tour work, including the very large-scale show As the World Tipped by Wired Aerial Theatre, which came to South Korea and the Seoul Street Arts Festival, I think, 5 years ago now. And we also run international showcase events, which are great opportunities for us to meet friends and colleagues who work in outdoor arts from around the world at festivals in the UK and also internationally. And we use those events as a way of promoting artists and building relationships and understanding about the outdoor arts festival scene and what's going on in the UK and around the world. Next slide, please. Just to tell you a little bit about Without Walls. Without Walls is the biggest network of outdoor arts festivals in the UK, and Extracts is the manager of this consortium. It includes 35 organisations and festivals all over the country, and our main work is commissioning artists to create ambitious new projects that we support them to develop, and we support them to tour to audiences all over the country at our festival network. We also invest in research and development opportunities. We know that many artists need early investment in order to experiment with new ideas. So that's a big part of what we do. And the map that you can see here on this slide gives you an idea of where these festivals in England are located across the country. The fact that we manage this network means that we are speaking really regularly to our network of festivals across the country and to lots and lots of artists. Next slide, please. So in 2020, we had planned quite a lot of activity. Through the Without Walls network, we had planned a programme of 13 new shows that would be brand new works that were going to be commissioned and premiered at festivals from May 2020 and throughout the summer. We'd also planned as part of our showcase work that we would deliver a showcase in association with the Stockton International Riverside Festival. Many of the colleagues from South Korea are familiar with the Stockton International Riverside Festival and joined us for our first showcase there last year. And we were also going to be running a new event in association with the Birmingham International Dance Festival. We'd also planned some research visits to South Korea, also to Japan and Taiwan and Singapore, as well as several other European countries. And we had planned performances of As the World Tipped in Singapore and Taiwan throughout the summer of this year. Next slide, please. However, as we all know, 2020 is and has been the year of COVID. And in the UK, we had a national lockdown, which started officially from the 23rd of March, but although in reality it started a little bit earlier than that. And the lockdown began to lift at the end of June this year. But, you know, in reality, many restrictions were still in place and indeed are still in place. So from March, basically most of the festivals in the UK began to be cancelled, and throughout the rest of the summer, the schedule of cancellations just extended. So I'm sure this is a familiar story, but really almost everything in the UK in terms of the festival scene was cancelled, and for the most part our theatres remain closed. Most of our country is still now in a semi-lockdown as a second wave of the virus sweeps across Europe. Here in Manchester, where I am based, we're currently not allowed to meet with anyone outside our household, either indoors or outdoors, in a restaurant, in a house, or in a private garden. We are allowed to go to our places of work if they can be assured that they have been COVID secure. But like most people, we are mostly working from home and experiencing this very new sense of isolation that is so different to what those of us who work in festivals are familiar with and are used to. Next slide, please. So in 2020, instead of attending lots of festivals with tens of thousands of people, what we actually did, like everyone and like we are doing now, is we cancelled everything and reinvented a program of our activity on Zoom. Actually, we were using Zoom quite a bit before the lockdown came in, but suddenly this is where we live, where we meet and where we work, and we have become very familiar with working on Zoom. Next slide, please. So, of course, we have been having regular Zoom meetings to support all of the artists that we had planned to commission. And, you know, thank goodness we have this technology that enables us to stay connected with our colleagues, because for the artists, again, I know this will be a familiar story, it has been a really terrible experience. Most of the artists have been unable to work. Most of them have lost all of their income. Whilst there has been some support from the government for income for people that are salaried and who work freelance, it has been really very, very difficult. And there are still lots of people who have received very little or sometimes no additional income at all. So there is some real hardship happening in our sector. For Without Walls, we were very fortunate. We were able to continue working and we were able to pay cancellation fees to all of our artists. So for the group of companies and artists that we had been planning to support and that we had commissioned for 2020, we were able to give them some financial support as well as some programming and strategic support by, inviting them to join us for meetings and, offering advice on how they can continue to develop their projects. We also realized that this was such a new situation that many of our artists, as well as our festivals, were going to need specialist advice about how to plan for COVID. So we've appointed a health and safety specialist, a production manager, who is able to offer individual advice to all of the artists and festivals that we are working with, so that they can help plan risk assessments to ensure that they can operate in some way, in a way that protects them from the worst risks of the virus. And as well as that, of course, we have been planning and delivering lots of online networking opportunities and advice surgeries for the artists and festivals and colleagues that we work with. Next slide, please. So we've become experienced at delivering webinars. And so throughout the summer, we have been delivering a series of webinars and online events for artists and festivals and our wider community. The first of these, that was very much our first experiment in this activity, was the replanning of an activity we had scheduled in association with the European Street Arts and Circus Network called Circus Strada. We had plans to deliver a in-person workshop and symposium called a Circus Strada Lab for a group of Circus Strada members, and this was going to take place in the north of England with a group of maybe about 20 individuals from the Circus Strada network attending. However, this was clearly not possible given that we were in the middle of lockdown in April. So we planned an online lab and delivered an online event about leadership in the time of crisis. That was our first event, and that took place in June. We also delivered a range of different events and activities, but amongst them were the Stockton International Festival showcase that we had planned. We worked carefully with the festival organisers to organise some online meetings and activities to bring the artists and festival organisers from the UK and also from around the world together for a series of meetings and to look at what some of the current issues were in the outdoor art sector, and also to see the work of some artists online. So as part of that discussion, we had a focus on East Asia. This included speakers from South Korea with the really wonderful, brilliant Jin Yim, as well as some other speakers from different East Asian countries. We also organised as part of that event a series of networking meetings and a panel discussion about the thing that is really preoccupying us here in the UK and Europe, which is the situation regarding Brexit, the UK's departure from the European Union. Later in the year, we also did a panel discussion online about how to programme and present COVID-safe events. This was very much aimed at event organisers to look at different strategies they might use about how to make an event, how to ensure an event could go ahead in a safe way in the context of COVID. And we've also done a series of other events and seminars about issues such as access for disabled people. We did a very big conference about the looking at different issues of environmental sustainability and how that applies to outdoor artists developing work and outdoor organisers and festivals presenting work. There is quite a big series now of events that we've delivered, and you can find all of them on our website, and I've put the link in there. Next slide, please. So in terms of other things to do with the response to COVID-19, whilst most of the events have, of course, been cancelled, there have been a few brave organisers who have tried to present things through the from the end of the summer. Greenwich and Docklands International Festival, that some of you may know, which takes place in London, usually in June and July, decided at the beginning of the lockdown to change its date to the end of August and into September. So they did run some festival events over 3 weeks. And they worked very hard to look at ensuring that they could present these events in a way that was appropriate and safe in the context of COVID-19. There was a lot of work that was presented in small locations in community settings for very small audiences. And the festival model was really about presenting work in a big range of different locations across a very wide area of London. It had small audiences and it was mostly ticketed, and it didn't look like the kind of festival that we are used to and that we know, but it was amazing to see something taking place, and wonderful for us, as they are one of our partners in Without Walls, to see some of the Without Walls shows that we had been working on actually get presented in this difficult summer. Next slide, please. We were also really pleased that in the early part of the spring, we were able to work with an extraordinary artist called Luke Jerram, who wanted to make a piece of work quite fast in response to the situation that we found ourselves within, a global pandemic. And he made a piece called In Memoriam, which is a piece, an installation that is really a memorial to all of those people who have sadly died from COVID-19, but also a recognition of the importance of our National Health Service. And this has been an extraordinarily moving piece that has now been presented in quite a few different locations across the UK, including in Greenwich as part of the Greenwich and Docklands Festival. And this is continuing to tour right now. There have been a few other exciting opportunities to see live work. Here in Manchester, I was really excited to go and see an outdoor dance programme in Manchester last week. Again, it took place for very small audiences across a very large space. But wow, it was amazing to see some artists kind of relatively close up, and the audience really loved that experience. And we have had other festivals in our network have now been beginning to try and do some things in outdoor spaces. Next slide, please. So, of course, what we're also doing is looking forward and planning for what can happen in 2021. We are assuming that COVID restrictions will still be in place. And we obviously have to navigate the fact that this means that there's going to be limited opportunities for us to present work internationally and indeed have international work come into the UK. So many of the festival organisers are focusing on work that they know can be presented in the context of COVID restrictions. There are real challenges here to decision making, and many festivals I know are looking at making decisions as late in the day as possible in order to ensure that they can be flexible around their contracting and respond to the situation that is happening, you know, when the festival is due to take place. Next slide, please. We're also, of course, trying to remain hopeful. So we are working hard to maintain international relationships by attending events such as this. We're trying very hard to support artists and festivals by, you know, being in touch with them very regularly. We're planning for our festivals and showcase events in 2021, but we know that we're going to have to decide nearer the time whether they can actually proceed. And interestingly, we're still in discussion about taking As the World Tipped, our large-scale show, to Taiwan. But it's challenging because when you build in the quarantine restrictions and the isolation time required, this would mean 36 days of isolation and quarantine for our whole team, which makes for a very challenging situation, as you will all understand. Next slide, please. So we're really hoping we can do this kind of thing, which is an image from our wonderful Stockton showcase last year that some of you will have attended. Next slide. And this kind of thing, which may be about visiting. This is a photograph taken, I believe, in the Seoul Street Arts Festival 4 years ago, maybe. And the next slide. And another image here from Stockton International Festival, where we see the crowds, very big crowds attending our work. And the next slide. And we're hoping that we may be able to invite delegates from South Korea and other countries to visit UK festivals and organisations here in Manchester or in London or wherever we can make work happen. And we will just have to stay connected with you about what feels like it may be possible in 2021. Next slide. Of course, we are hoping to return to South Korea. We love the festivals and the artists that you have there. We really hope to return with a delegation of festival organisers from the UK and continue to build those connections. Next slide. And in the meantime, we're continuing to try and support the artists that we work with. We're trying to stay connected with people around the world. We're trying to attend events like this. And we would ask you to look out for our future events and online meetings. Please sign up to our mailing list if you'd like more information about the activity that we're doing. And please note that we have a program of webinars for international, to connect the international street arts community called Global Conversations, run by my brilliant colleagues, Anaïs Bio, Hannah Hartley, Eleanor Cavallero, and Harpreet Kaur. And the next one is on the 13th of November, where we'll be looking at international marketplaces. So please look out for that. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to continue to share more information with you through our next discussion. And thank you again to my friends in South Korea for inviting me to join you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. In 2020, many of the festivals faced a lot of challenges, and from the previous two presentations, we could learn about the status of overseas street art festival. And we're going to continue with the Q&A session. We already have our artistic director, Mr. Im Jong-young, and President Lee Nan-hee next to me. And you must have some questions regarding the presentations given. And maybe as an artist, as a programmer, or the director, the creator, you must have a lot of things you want to share. Although we do not have a lot of time, but for about 30 minutes, we'll be able to have a discussion. So first, we're going to lead some conversation with four presenters, and we will open the floor later on to invite some questions from the audience who are viewing online. And we also are airing this on YouTube, and many are watching on YouTube as well. Although we will not be able to entertain all the questions, but we would be able to think together about the questions posted. So I will try to accept as many questions as possible and lead the conversation. As I listened to the presentation, due to COVID-19, we are going through a very difficult time, and we heard about the livelihood and the survival of the artists. Everyone wished to go back to the past. Of course, we cannot turn back the clock, but we all hope for a future that is somewhat similar to what we had in the past. And as we stand and stay still a little bit, we can think about a lot of things that we couldn't in the past when we were walking and running. There are challenges and many difficulties, but we sometimes, one of the presenters mentioned, we equip ourselves with the perspective that through which we can look at the cities again. And Director Pierre Dupont also talked about we could program the events with a longer term perspective. And maybe we can start the conversation about what new values we explored from street arts. So because of this hiatus due to COVID-19, because we had a lot of street arts festivals operated by different municipalities and local governments, and Korea is one of the most active country with a lot of street art festivals from Asia. So with this hiatus, with this pause, we could wake up to new recognition. So what are the new acknowledgement or the recognition we had about the city and space and street arts? Can Mr. Yoon start?
So I think that we've talked about the world that COVID-19 has brought to us. We were very busy in the past that we really didn't have time to stop and reflect back on our lives. But COVID-19 really brought about a complete stop to all of that, especially in spring when the pandemic started spreading in earnest. I really felt this huge change in my life, and that's really distinctive, stands out in my memory. It is not just about economic activity, but I saw this huge decrease in traffic, in terms of cars and in terms of people in the streets. And I think this lasted for quite a long time, that the city basically was wrapped in silence. And I still remember that very vividly. I don't know exactly how to put this, but COVID-19 has really forced us all to stop in our tracks. And because of physical distancing and social distancing, yes, we're not physically able to meet and interact with other people. But I think also because of this forced stop on our lives, because of the coronavirus, we feel that we want to reach out more to other people. And that's an emotion that we really have. And also, because of all of this forced stop on our lives, I had to use the time, or basically I was really forced into redesigning my life and to rethink about this city that we're living in.
Of course, everything came to a halt, but nothing, I think, was in complete stop. up until now about street arts, street art festivals, I was thinking, have we ever had this kind of in-depth conversation and dialogue? When we put together a festival, of course, we have the reason for existence or fundamental questions in mind, but this year, we could also go into a microscopic scale and dig deeper into these topics. And I had long, in-depth conversation with colleagues and friends, and this is something new that I've experienced this year.
Yes, I think that from thus far, we've looked at arts festivals and arts organizations from a very macro point of view, but after COVID-19, if we were able to really take a closer look into our own personal lives and take a look at the people around us, at our neighbors and our friends and loved ones. So with that, maybe we can go more in depth and talk in earnest about outdoor arts or street arts. Earlier, we heard from Pierre of Chalon dans la Rue about some of these positive points, but also some of the concerns that they have. Whereas street arts is really about having this great big festival, great big festive atmosphere outdoors, but we're essentially losing that because of COVID-19. When we think of a festival, especially when we think of a street arts festival, we imagine dozens and hundreds of people coming together in one location and enjoying themselves. And how do I put this? They engage in a sort of very liberated mood, a very liberated atmosphere. And I think that this is what a lot of programmers are thinking about, a lot of festival directors are thinking about as well. Next year, we all know that COVID-19 is expected to continue, which means that we have to reimagine street arts festivals in the COVID-19 framework. How is it going to change? Can you tell us about some of your thoughts in regards to that? Who would like to go first? Why don't we ask Ms. Lee to go first? And perhaps from the UK, we do have Maggie who is joining us online. Maybe Maggie, if you would like to speak your thoughts on that matter.
Yes. Generally, the role of festivals are twofold. The reason for existence is twofold. One is that people can depart from everyday lives. They feel liberated and they can regain vitality for everyday lives, so they can get recharged. And second is with the introduction of urban festivals, the positive aspect of cities can be viewed from a macro point of view, and it can also create a, let's say, fantasy of integration among other people living in the same space, which is a city. But with social distancing, with non-contact or contactless festival where people cannot get together, so far, street art festivals used to symbolize the city, and it was held in this positive venue inside the city with a lot of audience present together. But going forward, we will not be able to continue with that shape or form. So new shape of festival should be invented to offer this sense of deviation or departure from everyday life and sense of revitalization. So we have to ponder on this question, and we have to explore the festival spirit or festivity of the festivals. When we think about this form factors or the methods of the festivals, maybe instead of gathering a lot of people in a single space, instead, maybe the festival can go to and permeate into small spaces where citizens lead their everyday lives. So that's the shape increasingly new events are taking. And we also need to think about how to connect these small locations and spaces and gather all of these in a big umbrella of the street art festival.
Can we now turn to the UK side? Maggie, what are the artistic directors and artistic programmers thinking of? Because I understand that you may be engaging with them on different conversations about that. So what do you think is going to happen with the street art scene and with street arts festivals after COVID-19? Where is that big energy of a festival going to go?
Hi. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing things correctly, but I think you're asking me about the general trends in what's happening in the UK in street arts festivals. And I suppose I would say that I think that this pandemic has made us, everybody, value the opportunities that we have to interact with people. Because right now this is something that we're not allowed to do in a free and liberal way in the way that we're used to. Any opportunities to be together and to gather in public spaces has now an even greater significance. And it's very interesting because I think that, you know, in the context of a pandemic, when we have the closure of many of our buildings, and there are very limited opportunities for people to see anything live, you know, the opportunity to present live performance in public spaces is pretty much the only opportunity that we have at the moment in the UK to really see live performance. And I think all of the research that has been going on here in the UK in the last, you know, sort of 8 months shows that audiences are much more comfortable with the idea of coming to see work in the public space. So whereas in many ways the festival organizers and the artists who specialize in working in outdoor locations have not always had the same degree of prominence in the media as the artists that are presenting work in our theatres and venues, they now have a much greater profile because they're one of the only things that are allowed to happen. And I think, you know, so in general, I think people are thinking about public space in a very different way right now. But importantly, I think, yeah, the artists, as always, are going to lead the way in terms of how to help us interpret what this pandemic has meant for society. And I think that is something very special and kind of really points to the role of artists in our society and the public appetite for being able to gather together and experience something together. Because the installation work, the work that actually can take place without live performance is I think going to continue to be very important, and is a very important part of the ecology of outdoor arts and what we like to experience and see in our festivals. But the opportunity to really interact with people in a close-up way, in a way that is a big part of the tradition of street arts, is something that at the moment is much more challenging. But I'm looking forward to seeing how our artists are going to engage with that challenge.
네, 지금 영국의 어떤 상황을 말씀해 주시면서
Yes, thank you. You talked about the situation in the UK, and because indoor spaces are considered quite dangerous, public spaces are used more, and people have more positive reception of that concept, and the artists are utilizing those opportunities. And Mr. Yoon, maybe you.
I think that COVID-19 has brought us a gift. I don't know if I should say that it's a gift. Maybe I should be careful with my word selection. But I think that COVID-19 has obviously brought us the awareness of environmental challenges, or all of these different challenges that we had ignored in the past, but we're now seeing now. So we've seen many different interesting experiments coming out in the art scene. A lot of these different shows and a lot of these different performances are very smaller scale, but also very interesting and very experimental. But this does not mean that we should just do away the festival spirit. We shouldn't just ignore that. We want to try to have a very safe environment where people still can have that festival going experience. I think that humans really just adapt very quickly to the environment. And this is something that I was able to see very recently in the media. There was this club in Australia, and many people were sitting in chairs, basically. They were not allowed to stand up from their chairs, but music was played and they could basically dance while sitting down, and people actually loved it. They had fun and they felt like it was a game. They were given these rules, but they thought that this was really interesting and fun. And I think that we have that possibility, and festivals can allow us to see those new potential.
Yes, we are talking about festival spirit, festivity, so street arts and the creators of street arts are the ensuing topics that we can discuss, I believe. When Maggie spoke, so the artists can come up with the creative ways and to add festivity to festivals. Of course, the planners and programmers are important, but the creators are making a very big contribution. They can be instrumental in bringing new concepts and new air. And France has a long tradition, and a lot of examples were cited. And maybe we can talk about the artists and street artists in France. What are they trying as a new mode of creation? What are the new ideas that French creators and artists are coming up with to meet the audience and spectators? So maybe director Pierre Duport of Chalon La Rue can talk about this.
Bonjour. Oui, je crois qu'on est face
Yes,
à
greetings again.
une évolution liée à
The situation we are facing, in fact,
invite à utiliser
is of course it's linked to the question how we're going to use the media in this crisis created by COVID-19. So how are we going to use more creatively media that are already available? So we do have some examples. Sometimes we meet through these online platforms, or sometimes live streaming is used to invite spectators, and there were some examples and cases given, and all of these are very interesting because all of these make us ask questions again. So street arts, they used to take place in public spaces. How are we going to bring them to virtual world and digital world? Digital world is of course part of our lives, and we encounter them all the time. And how would artists use it, and what kind of capabilities should be nurtured, and how we're going to interact online. So we can ask all these questions, but at the same time, we also need to think about what are the weaknesses and limitations of this new media. As is mentioned, mankind always adapt to changes. So how are we going to build relations with the physical world and our body? And all of these fundamental, profound questions also follow. And because of COVID-19, we also are experiencing fear of others to a certain extent. So what's most important is that how we're going to transform the fear we hold to energize our creative activity. So quarantine, social distancing, and isolation, a new way of communication. We could dwell on all of these. We also need to think about how to create new opportunities and meet more people and establish contacts and come into physical contact with other people. In my view, I think there are so many different positive possibilities. We can use different communication methods and modes. And crucially, what we have to remember is that we have to establish new relations with our bodies and with the physical world. We shouldn't lose sight of this. And we also need to think about how to use that and find new alternatives. And if there is prior experience, we should share those experiences and build on them. And we have to go through this in full swing, let's say. And in closing, all of these boils down to a very critical question. This is a problem posed to the artists. Artists are experiencing radical changes. They need to use new formats. And the course of adaptation will take time and effort. And through this, of course, we have to bear in mind the visibility of artistry. And programmers shouldn't forget artists, and programmers and planners have to come up with ways to collaborate with creators and artists. Of course, we cannot gather a lot of people in a single space, but we have to explore and create a new space and new form of performances. I think this goes for all the other industries and sectors of the society, not just art. But nonetheless, under these influences, the creativity should never be forgotten. I was also asked to talk about achievements. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of tangible and visible achievements. We are looking for new ways of communication and new ways of meeting spectators. I think that's all I can say. But the biggest problem we have to find the solution to is how to seize this opportunity. The pandemic will not go away in 1 or 2 months. We have to think about these possibilities.
Yes, I think that we need to have a radical change, and many people are really working hard to adjust to these changes. I think that artists and programmers, they have to engage in strong solidarity and information exchange and show commitment to try to find new solutions of creativity. I think we do have a question from the audience. Let me ask this question. This is from one of our YouTube audience members, Mr. Jung, from the audience. The festivals, even after 2020, would have to take into consideration COVID-19. What are your thoughts on that? Are there any plans in the pipeline for festivals after 2020? And I think that it's very interesting to also look at the peripheral and the surrounding areas of Seoul Square, not necessarily just looking at the center area of Seoul Square. So what are your thoughts on expanding out into the surrounding areas of Seoul Square? So I think this question is asking about our plans for next year, any festivals that are going to be hosted next year, even in the COVID era. And also, when we talk about the surrounding areas, the periphery and not the square itself, what allows you to make the decision to focus on those surrounding areas? I think this is a specific question to Mr. Yoon. So what was the first question? Your plans for festivals for next year? I think that right now, because I have to say I'm still in shock, really, because of COVID-19. So, and there's still some work cut out for me for this year. So first of all, I have to focus on that. Regarding next year, regarding sort of big picture, I think I have a general big picture idea of what's going to happen next year, but I haven't worked out the details yet about the festival planning for next year. But I do think that if we're going to see our third or fourth waves of the pandemic going forward next year, then I would think that, as for me personally, at least until next year, We have to be mindful of the fact that we are living in a natural catastrophe, that we have to continue to try to experiment with some of these different channels and different forms that festivals can take. And I do hope that we can receive the necessary funding for that, because I do think that festivals can be a medium for people to explore those different possibilities. As for the other question about the peripheral area, the surrounding areas of Seoul Square, I'm not just focusing on the areas directly surrounding Seoul Square, but also, as I mentioned before, on mass media and many different stories that we are familiar with that have already been widely shared and known through mass media. But there are other different stories, other narratives that have not been more widely shared. So these are stories of oppression or stories of oppressed feelings or emotions. So when I talk about the periphery, I'm not just talking about the actual physical space, but peripheral narratives and peripheral stories as well. Thank you very much. We are running behind on schedule, but we do have some other participants online. If you have any questions, I'd like to take one last question from the audience on YouTube. If you have a question, please raise your hand if you have a question.
용감하게 손을 드시는 분이 안 계신데요.
I don't think anyone is holding up one's hand. I don't know if I'm seeing all the participants on a single screen. I might be missing some. So if you have questions, please unmute yourself and ask a question. We'll try to have them answered.
네, 지금 질문이 없으신 것 같아요.
I think there is no question.
다 하고 계신 것 같고요.
Yes, I think all of us are in a reflectory mode, I guess. We have about 4 minutes left. We have prepared a lot of questions. But in the interest of time, we will just ask this one question as final one. Because of the COVID-19, we can think about many different things, including environment, injustice, racial discrimination, and and street art. Street art always reflects what's happening in the real world in the contemporary issues. So how would street arts reflect these contemporary issues, including COVID-19 and many other topics? Maybe we can go through all presenters one by one and offer answer to this question and also closing remarks as well.
I think that festivals and street arts festivals in particular have been restricted from experimenting in the past, but because of COVID-19, I think that we have been given a little bit more freedom to experiment, because we have no choice but to be more creative to get out of this COVID-19 situation. And I think that we could be excused some leeway in experimenting with our festivals. I think we are allowed more freedom to try to really identify the very hidden stories and try to expose those oppressed stories. And I think that COVID-19 has allowed us to express that to some degree. So I think that it's important for us to make use of this opportunity to try to get more voices heard. And this is going to go a long way to try to fight on inequality and those other issues that we really have not been able to tackle because they're so sensitive. A lot of these different relationships and ideas and concepts that we really try to bury because they're so sensitive and difficult to talk about. And I think that through COVID-19, we have that freedom now to talk about these ideas and bring them up to the surface and make them more visible. And this itself is becoming part of our everyday norm. And I think that that is also a very important change that was brought about by COVID-19. I hope that many street artists and performers and programmers can really try to make use of this opportunity. From the point of view of festival organizers, I think that they have to be mindful of different other issues as well, such as disability, accessibility for persons with disabilities or various environmental issues, that we have to be more mindful of these other different concerns.
So I ask you to be please succinct. So far, Street Arts Festival played many different roles, and one of paramount importance was to give the message of integration. And going beyond that fantastical idea of integration, we have to look in the eyes of the true fullness of integration, and we have to turn that into a festival that we can implement. Next year, I sincerely hope that we will be able to have some festivals, and we are seeking ways to hold festivals in any way possible, and we are offering new ideas and new concepts, and I sincerely hope that we will be given the opportunity.
Next, Maggie, would you like to also conclude for us?
Thank you. I agree with so much of what Jong-yoon and Rani have said. I think, the COVID has caused us all to put the world on hold, and we've pushed the pause button, and it's an opportunity for us to think about what we value about what we do, but also what we need to do differently. And I think, as Jong-yoon said, the opportunity to look at who our festivals are for and who is actively involved. And we love to think that our festivals are very accessible to everybody, but I think it's really important that we look at who are those, who are the people that we're not reaching, and thinking about issues about how can we make our work more accessible, and what does our society look like, and how are our festivals a part of that. And alongside of that, of course, the fact that we've been unable to travel has given us the really, really important opportunity to look at what we're doing to our environment, and how we are going to address issues of environmentalism through the work that we do. So yes, even though I'm mourning the loss of my normal life and mourning the loss of the opportunity to be with you all in person, I think that there's, we need to take this opportunity to think about what we want to do differently in the future.
네, 마지막으로 프랑스.
Yes, finally, Director Dupont.
Je crois qu'en fait, la crise sanitaire a renforcé des éléments qui étaient déjà présents.
The current crisis can fortify the important aspects that we took for granted for a long time, and we experience in our life inequality, imbalance, and injustice, and environmental issues, and issues related to production. So COVID-19 is bringing all of these problems to the fore. And this crisis is making us rethink the way we used to live our lives, and made us reflect on the lifestyle we had. So in view of that, maybe street arts had its role reaffirmed by many. Through street arts, we think about relations with other people, altruism, and why we live. And through street arts, we can come closer to the fundamental and profound questions. To what center are we going to go close to? And we can think about all of these different questions. And this yields an opportunity for us to come closer. We can make our voice be heard, and we can strengthen our linkage and connection. And be it organizers or programmers, the year 2021 will be a different year, and diverse programming will be introduced, and the opportunities for participation will be broadened, I hope, and I hope it will lead to a generation of new opportunities. Instead of us staying with status quo and past way of doing things. We can create something new. And our assignment or homework assignment is to ensure diversity for street arts and also ensure participation from diverse artists, diverse solutions, and many different artistic proposals. And in doing so, everyone will express and speak up and try new things.
Thank you for all of your good comments. COVID-19 has brought about a crisis situation for us, but I think that we can take use of this crisis and make it into an opportunity. I know that we were all very lost and confused throughout 2020, but going forward in 2021, maybe we can come up with better creative ideas to overcome the crisis and to allow for more connectivity between us and among us. We were not able to address some of the questions that have been raised during the course of the presentations. Hopefully you can maybe find a way to engage in other discussions with your colleagues, wherever you are, to find answers to these different questions, the very important concerns. I would like to thank all of our 4 presenters for their very valuable time. We would like to conclude part 1 of today's event for now and meet you back after a 10-minute break to have a roundtable session to hear more about what is going on in the scenes in the actual field. Thank you for being with us.
네, 안녕하세요. 2부로 다시 돌아왔습니다. 서울 거리예술축제 2020 포럼 2부 위기의
Yes,
시대
we are going to
축제의
continue with
선택.
the second round of
이제
discussion.
이야기를 좀
We're going
해보려고
to
하는데요.
continue on with the
오늘은 젊은
title of
예술가분들과
Times of Crisis and
기획자분들을
Choice of
이렇게
Festivals.
6분 모셨습니다.
We do
제가
have
소개하기보다
6 different
한 분
discussants.
자기 소개를
Instead of me
하면서
introducing them, maybe we
동시에
can go
이
around
위기의 시대라고
and
저희가 계속 얘기하고
have the
있는데요. 위기와
panelists
불확실의 이
introduce
시대, 코로나
themselves.
시대를 어떻게 지내고
And
계신지,
maybe you
어떤
can
일들이
add
좀
in
있었는지,
what happened to
축제를
you and
만드시려고
how
하는
you are
축제의 입장에서 또
going
예술가나
about.
예술가
And
입장에서
from a
간단하게
program
얘기해 주시면 좋겠습니다. 제
perspective, of
옆에
producers or creators' perspective, maybe we can have some short introduction. Starting from my left. Good evening. I am from Project Group North Pole Clementine. I am Jinung Jung. We publish different books. As I've finished schools this year, I wanted to start out and become more active socially. And I was looking for new opportunities, but because of COVID-19, a lot of things got canceled, and I only conducted one project, and everything else was canceled. So personally, this year was quite disappointing for me.
Hello. I represent 문화로 도도다 or culture 도도다. My name is Lee Eun-kyung. I'm also a festival programmer and a performance programmer. I'm also a part of a performance troupe. Thank you for the music, by the way. And I think that I have been asked to come to this forum because I wear many hats. No, this wasn't a Seoul Street Arts Festival, but recently there was another festival hosted by the Ministry of Culture, and it was a virtual event, Month of Culture for the Republic of Korea. And I am currently programming many different cultural events. We have been asked and invited to come to many different festivals, many of which have been canceled, or other events have been transitioned to online. I work at Culture Tododa, and our works have basically all been canceled except for one commission work. They were supposed to be shown in about 7 different festivals, but they were all canceled. So we were not able to showcase our work in any festival. But last week, we were able to submit a sort of a letter of proposal to meet with the audience.
Good evening. I'm from Seoul Fringe Network Festival, and I am General Manager Nam Hana. I'm accustomed by calling by my nickname, which is Firefly. Fortunately, this year, Seoul Fringe Network held festival in the month of August. As we held the festival, we went through a lot of trials and tribulations, but nonetheless, it was so fortunate for us to hold indeed the festival. In the beginning, we were pushing for offline festival, but because of coronavirus and because of space issue, we combined that with online festival. So 2 rounds of festivals were held through 3 weeks of August, from 13 to 24. It was offline festival. We had creators and spectators, and from 25th to 28th, online festival took place. So as we meet our spectators and audience in August, we were hopeful that this will continue on in the second half of this year, but that didn't happen. So to the disappointment of mine, but still, I delight this opportunity to join in this discussion.
Hello. My name is Kim Seung-won. I'm from Space Mind Project. I'm a creator. I think that we are all facing a very similar situation, everybody here. I was supposed to participate in several projects, and I was also supposed to showcase some performances at different festivals, and I was also planning to participate in the Fringe Festival, but as with all of you, many of them have been postponed, many of the festivals have been canceled. So I think that some of the festivals really have either been canceled or they've been turned online. Last week's Gwangju Street Arts Festival, they managed to host it offline. So I had the opportunity to actually go to Gwangju myself. Many of these different support projects, from spring to summer on, I have tried to program different performances, but these were also postponed. So for one of those cases, we came up with a video. I think that that's going to be shown online and broadcast online in the second half of November. and also for the support projects. Because there's a deadline, I think that right now, because of the social distancing measures have been a little bit relaxed, I am really working very hard to do this offline. Fortunately, with the Fringe Festival was held, fortunately, so I was able to meet with the audiences there. So that was my year.
Good afternoon. I am composer from composer. I use electronic sounds and create different performances and music. I am Eunhee Jo. I'm interested in creating music that is against the backdrop of space, and I get involved in different projects. In international exchange program, We Fear is the project that I took part as part of SSAF, and we spent time to think about the current situation. And of course, a lot of questions were brought to me because of this crisis about my work, about my life. And for the first time, drive-through performance, drive-in performance, and Zoom-based performance were tried out. And I had many new experience because of crisis.
Hello, I'm from Gwangmyeong Culture Foundation. My name is Hong Sung-chul. I also program the Gwangmyeong Family Theater. Fortunately, this year for the Family Theater in August, because of the timeliness of August, we were able to host our festival, but we had to do it in a decentralized manner, in distributive format, and also we had to expand the timeline to try to have social distancing. But I am going to talk about this a little bit more in detail later on.
Yes, we heard introductions from 6 participants. Some of you were director, planners, programmers, and artists yourselves. Unfortunately, 2 festivals represented here, so Fringe Festival and Gwangmyeong Family Theater, were not canceled, and they actually happened. But many of the festivals didn't have the same luck, and Corona will continue on in the year 2021, and the festivals might be canceled. But in order not to repeat the same course of developments from a programmer's and artist's point of view, maybe we can share our experience together, handling or coping with cancellation. So maybe we can hear from someone who experienced cancellation. Maybe Ms. Lee from Culture Dododa. Can you share your experience?
Yes, as have been mentioned, Culture Dododa, the group that I participate in, we were supposed to participate in 7 festivals. They were all canceled. And if I were to go into a little bit more detail, the festivals were not all canceled. Some of them were actually canceled. There were some cancellations, but there were also some areas where we had to choose between offline formats or an online format. But there were some instances where we could not have our performance showcased online. So essentially, we had no choice but to pull out, and so that's why 7 of our showcases were canceled. And also, in some of the performance troupes that I am participating in, there were some cancellations, yes, but also there were areas where video platform or online platform, there were all these transitions to those platforms. So I was able to present on an online platform in some cases. I think that all street artists would have gone through the same experience of these cancellations. When there were the first initial wave of cancellations in the first half of the year and the cancellations in the second half of the year, they were felt very differently from my side. At first, I thought that why are they not going through with it? shouldn't they just try to power through? And I really wanted to try to persuade the festival organizers. But in the second half of the year, I started to just realize that this is something I had to come to terms with because there was nothing I could do to fight this process. So when I was given the call about the cancellation, I knew that this was going to be about a cancellation, and the festival organizer would be on the other line, in a very sad voice and tell me about the cancellation. So later on, I started to get used to the cancellations. But I think that I was given some more hope that things would change next year. So I'm trying to come up with new ways for next year.
Fringe Festival didn't get cancelled, but it was held in a different way than before. So you reinvented yourself instead of getting it cancelled. So what are the new ways you found? And in the process of making that decision, I was wondering who made those decisions, who were the decision maker? Because the Fringe Network takes place in a public space, before we made any decisions, it took a long time to have full discussion and dialogue. And public spaces had to strictly follow the regulations given by Seoul Metropolitan City. And it was a lot of public spaces were closed, and we engaged in conversation how to bring audience, and we discussed where was the middle ground we can meet between open space and closed space. And we had an imperative of holding this festival, and our first priority was to secure good indoor space. And many of the artists that partake in the Fringe Festival, they base their artwork on the space the artwork is or the performance is showcased in. So if it's hard to bringing spectators physically, maybe we can take a new path of filming it, and we discussed that possibility up until a month ago, before the festival with the organizers and other stakeholders. We think about how to continue with in-person method and how to ensure safety, but at the same time we thought of other alternatives, and we also selected online platform because in person could not be harnessed to the fullest. And online platform is not simply a streaming of the show or the performances. And of course, for artists, it would be very different to perform in front of the audience or perform in front of camera. So we had a full discussion with different collaborators and stakeholders, and in the course, we sent out emails to artists, and through those emails, we try to fully explain everything that had happened and what are the choices that we had to make, and we also offered some choices and options to them. So in the process, artists had different thoughts, so we also could learn what are the thoughts that artists had, and we also discussed together how to exhibit and materialize the performance they wanted to show to the spectators and audience. So we thought about different method of approaching spectators. And Cultural Center, Bichukiji, was our biggest candidates, and we combined on and offline together. And we also introduced a gamification element to the festival, and all of these were created in a short period of time, and the developer who were involved in creating the virtual platform said it took 300 hours of development. So I went back and forth, but I hope I answered the question.
So we also heard about the situation at Gwangmyeong Festival, that you were able to host the Gwangmyeong Festival, but in a way that was different from the one that you had originally planned. So what are the changes that you saw, and what are the different challenges, and who were the decision makers of those changes? The Gwangmyeong Family Theater, Fortunately, our team manager and the president of the Gwangmyeong Culture Foundation felt that it was important for us to meet with the audiences in an offline basis. So they were very committed to that idea, which is why I was also motivated to go on with that festival. But because we are operating with a public budget, we had to be very safe and follow strictly the COVID safety guidelines. So the festival is supposed to be held over 2 days, but we expanded it to 4 days and decentralized the space so that we tried to move away from very crowded spaces, not to have many people in one location. And what was very fortunate is that this festival is actually a very small scale. So we were able to control all the exits and entrances, which allowed us to take all the precautions necessary. So we were able to do temperature checks of all of the guests and also ask them to fill out the health checklists, the surveys, and also do social distancing in terms of the spacing, the seating. We were able to bring in enough staff to do so, to try to provide that guidance to our audience members. Although we were very nervous about the situation, we were able to do so because I think our leadership was very committed to the offline idea. And in Gwangmyeong City as well, many of the citizens were really open to the idea of turning to culture and the arts to try to overcome the so-called COVID blues, because they were all feeling very sad and depressed because of COVID-19, and this was a way to help them. I think that a lot of the festivals that were canceled were publicly organized festivals. I think that many of the privately organized festivals were able to go ahead. However, with Gwangmyeong, the city government was very committed to the idea of offline to try to help the citizens get over the COVID-19 blues. So when the local government is very committed to this idea, that would be very helpful so that the festivals can have this offline space. I think that many artists, you're basically told that you're canceled. Artists can come up with very creative alternatives, however. However, you are not part of the decision-making process on deciding whether or not to cancel the festival. In the case of Choonhee, what kind of experiences did you have regarding that? Were the cancellations very one-sided, or was there at least some level of communication?
I think I had many different experiences. Sometimes when I was notified of cancellation, there was nothing I can do, so I just said okay, and I moved on. And in some cases, we were given the full description or an explanation of the situation. Although it was not face-to-face meeting through Zoom, maybe we had a meeting and find solutions. So we made new attempts. And SSAF as well in the beginning, because this is an international exchange program. So through Zoom, we had to work with overseas artists through Zoom. Now, before the decision to cancel was made, I went through many different courses of action. So before cancellation, maybe we considered filming this and airing this as one option. Many of the performances that required physical audience present, there were many different considerations we had to take into account when we were filming that. So online and filming, so harnessing those into creative activities were thought about in a more deeper way.
I think that the online and digital, I think we did talk about that in the first part, that right now we're seeing radical change and artists are forced to not just maintain their current ways of thinking, but also have to come into contact with new media and try to engage in many different experiments. But that's not easy. I think that maybe you've had that experience, and maybe we can turn to another speaker, Kim Seung-eun. creator, an artist who I think you've maybe had the chance to try to digitize your performance. Did you have that experience when you had no choice but to transition online? And if there were any challenges in regards to that? I think that for us, in June, we had a real-time streaming performance. For real-time streaming, it was contactless in terms of we didn't have an audience. So because we had no idea if where the audience were, it was a little bit difficult to see if there was any feedback. But later, when I saw some other videos put on by other performers, I was able to see that that's probably how we looked online as well. And I think that other people might agree, which is that it's not a lot of fun watching an online performance. In ARCO, in Korea, and any other public arts funding agencies, they try to provide a lot of these different budget and funding for online transition of performances, but I felt that for small organizations who lack the necessary funding, they cannot even attempt digital transformation of their performance. So how should we bridge that gap? That was the question that I had. When we tried to produce video content of our performance, we had to move away from the existing style and manner of producing video content. We tried to do something completely new. We didn't want to use the old, same manner. We tried to come up with a more different experimental manner. And another thing is that in festivals, when we go back to more video performances, this was originally intended to be showcased also at SSAF as a future city. This was supposed to involve audience members. We were supposed to, engage the audience in this very interactive formats of a performance. But, we had to stage this online without any audience members, which meant that the performance felt like it was meaningless. It wasn't about us as actors or as performers. It was really the audience members who are the most important elements of this performance. But when we made it online, the audience members cannot interact with us. So we had to rewrite much of the script so that at least the audience members, when they watch it online, they can feel that at least the performance is speaking to them directly. So it was going to be challenging, but we at least wanted to make that attempt. However, one issue that came out of that is that we were looking at the camera and we thought that we were making eye contact with the audience members, but later when we saw the edited version, we saw that there was a mismatch with the eye contact between us and the audience members, that we were not actually making eye contact. So in the process of producing the video and editing the video, the editors, the video editors and the performers, I think that there was an issue in terms of our communication.
Yes, probably I think everyone is in the middle of finding solution, experimenting. Ms. Lee, maybe you also have experience of making video from the performance. What are the challenges you experienced? On filming the performances with a lot of questions to street artists. Is this the right way? Is this the right solutions? So many of the creative groups ask those questions themselves. In my view, this might not be a right solution or correct answer, but that is still the safest and surest way to put on a show in 2020. So as we switched to video, I thought a lot about what format we should take. And one of the festivals that I joined in decided to go online, and a lot of meetings were held, which format of online. And real-time streaming in the first of the year showed us that online spectators, the number of spectators joining in real time was really, really small in numbers. So it was quite shocking to me. Who is this festival for? I was thinking. So I had strong will to go against real time showing. So we had to record the performance and later air the show. And if that is the path that we're going to take, and what are the ways to film this performance? In what space should we take the video of this to maximize the in situ sensation or the sense of actuality that the creators can give. So in the periods of time, the promised projects were street arts performances. So in fact, as a directors and programmers' point of view, I encountered unexpected challenges, and the viewership for different performances was as if we are presented with the scorecards. But spectators or viewers who or posting comments or there was feedback. But so it's very multifaceted, but the performance groups might think it as a scorecard or assessment on them. So I thought, they might not be good. And that was one element. And another thing is one of the performances got canceled because it could not be taped or filmed. And culture Dododa is experience-focused performance. So a spectator might go into a flower shop-like space, and through a window they will look out, and in the space the spectator is asked to converse with the person from within. So turning that into video was a very difficult endeavor, and the organizers asked me, if you cannot turn this into video, we have to cancel your gig, and I had no other choice but to. So going video is something that we cannot evade. Maybe we have to think more about how to engage with spectators.
So I think that we've all been talking about the importance of the audience. Right now, we're seeing making a lot of these different videos and a lot of this production of video content, but who is watching them? When we go to the streets and we engage in these performances, I think they're only completed when they are brought before an audience. I think right now the audience members are physically so far away from us, and because they don't feel safe, they cannot get closer to us. This is a physical distance. What can we do to try to overcome this distance? What should we do to do outreach and get closer to the audience members? I think that this is a very big dilemma that we might have. Can you share with us some of your thoughts? I think that I had the chance to participate in 3 street arts festivals. I used to think that I used to wonder whether it's really hard to meet with the audience members offline. However, for our performances, I think it's safer for people to just see our performance rather than get on the subway, because our performances are tailored for one audience member. Which is why I wonder why our performances have been canceled, because I feel like our performances are way safer than just riding public transportation. So I think right now, we have to say that our street arts performances are still very valid as a format, but I think we still have to bring about some changes because of COVID-19. In December, we had plans to host a showcase of performance, but civic organization was going to have a meeting, and they asked us to perform at their meeting. And someone at the civic organization knew someone working in our team. So this was really using personal networks and interrelationships to try to do so, where we could really try to persuade the people, the organizers at the civic organization. I think because we have that network, we were able to persuade them and convince them of the need for a performance, and they were more open to the idea of hosting us. I think we did mention this earlier in the forum, but I think going forward, we're gonna see more small scale performances, or maybe smaller scale, or even larger scale virtual and offline performances. And in the past, maybe the performances are still going to be held in the streets, but with more control over the audience members. Because it's still a little bit dangerous for us to gather around. But at least Korea is not in a situation like the UK or France where there is a lockdown everywhere. If there is a lockdown, then I think that we have no choice but to stop street arts performances. But right now, at least in Korea, we have to identify other possibilities of what we can do. And I think that for artists to continue to explore these different avenues, that maybe we should be provided with more creative funding. Even if we cannot have an actual performance as an end result of the funding, that maybe we can still be provided funding on an institutional level.
As you mentioned, maybe riding a subway might be a little more dangerous than having a one viewer show. So we asked the question of what is to create a safe environment. Of course, complying with preventive measures is a basics, but it will not guarantee safety. So in a creative way, how can we communicate to the audience this encounter is safe, this space is safe? So French Network will be preparing next year's festival. Other than preventive measures, which is a given, in what ways can we entice viewers and audience more? So to add a little bit more, we plan to bring festival to online with 4 major prerequisites. First, viewers would have better access. So when simple streaming is selected, clicking through the platform and seeing the video might be quite technical for me. So we wanted to create a corridor where viewers can access performances easily. And second, bringing the sense of being in place to home. So you are not going there physically, but different elements can be brought to the virtual platform, like wristband or drinking beverages, or you can give an image of drinks, or keys provided to viewers to allow access. So what are the elements that will bring that physical sense of space to home? And third is just as if you will get a ticket at home, you also should be allowed to ticketing. And fourth one is to ensure copyright. And these performances are copyrighted asset. There should not be any copyright theft. So we also thought about copyright protection measures. So as was mentioned in the first part of this forum, we wanted to ensure the accessibility for the viewers, and we brought in the element of games. I think in the current time space, I think it was the right fit. You turn on the computer, instead of clicking through different buttons, you can walk through the corridor where you can meet many different performances. And I think next year we will work on upgrading this platform. And instead of streaming, we created edited video this year, and maybe we can speak the language in theater, and many will not be omitted from the video. So how can we embrace those theatrical elements? And we should be able to find common denominator between theater and video. So we are thinking all about this.
We are almost out of time, so the organizers are really pressing me to finish. But in 2021, festivals must continue, and I think that that is something that we all share, we all agree on. But there will be that risk of cancellations. So, from the point of view of festivals, we still want to continue on next year. So, can you tell us about your commitment and what do you want our festivals to look like in the future? Can you just briefly talk about that? So, fortunately, I was able to participate in the Fringe Festival this year, which I'm very grateful for. We had video, offline performance, or cancellation. We were given a choice and we decided to go with the offline performance. Fortunately, we didn't have any positive case of COVID-19, no patients, which is great. But what if there was a confirmed case within the audience or maybe within one of our performers? What if because of us, other teams were not able to perform? And what if the French festival has to shut down because of us? So I could not imagine how I would deal with that. I think that we should have asked more of those questions. You know, if what if something were to happen? If we do it online, what kind of liabilities are we going to suffer? What are the different issues? So the secretariat and artists should have that discussion, and I think that there needs to be some level of sharing of responsibility, especially if the performers decided to go with the offline route. And I think that there maybe needs to be a manual set up.
To begin, we talked about safety of audience. When we mulled over this, spectators coming to spaces, would they be wary of their safety? I think one that is wary is not the audience, it was organizers and the public agencies. So how should we make them rest assured? Maybe that's our homework assignment. So of course we need full support from the public organizations, government agencies, and when there is a festival going on in the public open space, they need to be able to have confidence in the safety of the festival. So we have to ensure that, and the communication is of paramount importance. So communication between organizers and the performers and creators should be more active. Instead of just notifying belatedly, we have to engage in discussion and think together as we reach solution to different challenges we face. And we also need to think about diversity of festival as well.
I think we did talk about Fringe, so can we move on? So yes, I think that all of my colleagues have already spoken at length about all the things that I wanted to talk about as well. I think for street arts, as a medium, it is very strong and resilient in the face of change, and it can adjust very quickly. But even despite that, things are changing so rapidly, and it's not like all the arts organizations can adjust at the same pace. For us, for our performances, it's a very talkative show. There's a lot of talk and back and forth, but we cannot, have big conversations in our performance because that's going to lead to a lot of spit droplets being shared around. And we don't typically use microphones, we just use our own voices. So that means that we have to stay at a distance away from our audience members, which means that we cannot really interact with them very close up. And so what I was really nervous about is that in street arts performances, maybe everything will be non-verbal going forward because it will be dangerous for us to talk in the performances. Despite that, we still think that verbal performances are here to stay. And if I were to think about the different evolutions that it will have, maybe in a French festival, we have the performance. In either case, we stayed about 20 meters away from the audience members, or when we went closer up, we wore face masks. there were these different trial and error, and I do hope that more artists can be allowed the room to try these different experiments. Maybe people can be a little bit more patient, and even if the artists fail, that's because right now in this current situation, everybody will fail. So we have to be more understanding of that failure. So we have to be more tolerant of that.
So to be honest, on the streets, distancing ourselves from audience, out in the open air, I think that is the safest thing. But yeah, this year made me feel how valuable and precious the audience is to me. And as I experienced many cancellation cases and performances that took place online, I also watched them and put myself into viewers' shoes. So in festival, in performances, I thought audience is the most important element. So I hope there will be festival that will bring artists and audience together, and I think sense of presence is very important for us all. Because I work with sound, I always think about that. And there are some sensations you can get when you are actually there, and maybe agencies or organizations who are holding those kind of festivals should also put in their wisdom as well. And in assistance or sponsorship programs, when the festival is looming, so instead of focusing too much on the quantitative outcome, as we go through, of course, results are important, but being through all this together and going through the process of handling different challenges and finding solutions, I think that is also valuable as well. So maybe we can adapt and adapt ourselves to and think about emergence of new platforms. So I think we can all join in this experience together.
I think next year we should at least still have a lot of offline performances. I know that there are a lot of these performances are being moved to the online realm, but it can never be a proper alternative to offline performances. And if the COVID-19 situation continues to go on even after this, I think that we should move into the realm of a small-scale performances and try to get closer to the audiences. And even if there are cancellations, we want to at least try to have a way to rethink the audience members and, of course, the artists who have really tried their best to allow the citizens and the members of the public to enjoy creative expression. And we have to create and foster an environment. Cultural foundations should all think of an enabling environment for artists.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we shared a lot amongst ourselves with six different panelists. I think you also raised a lot of different questions and food for thoughts going forward. I thank you for your contribution, and this concludes the first day of a forum. And next day, tomorrow, we're going to talk about sustaining the city with art, and we're going to present to you different speakers and panelists as well. So be there. And we still have our online audience with us. I apologize for not taking a lot of questions from the audience due to time constraints. We'll try to have more conversation tomorrow. I want to thank everyone who are watching on YouTube. I think we had a very fruitful discussion today, and I hope to extend this further and continue the conversation with colleagues and friends. Thank you.